Today's webinar promises to be a meaningful and engaging session where we all learn from the lived experiences of two remarkable speakers alongside a moderator whose insights from their field. Before we begin, let me introduce our esteemed speakers and the moderator for today. Today we have Purabi Bose, who is a social anthropologist and environmental scientist specializing in forest tenure, indigenous land rights, and climate adaptation in Asia, East Africa, and Latin America. Formerly an associate professor at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, she is now an international fellow of the Royal Swedish Academy of Agriculture and Forestry. Welcome you, Dr. Purabi Bose. We have with us Professor Yves Hausser, who is a conservation researcher and a practitioner with over 25 years of experience specializing in integrating social economic aspects into conservation strategies. A co-founder of the Association for the Development of Protected Areas, he serves as a professor of natural resource management at HEPIA Geneva and continues as a leader to ADAPT's operation. We welcome you, Professor Yves. And then we have our moderator, Dr. Abhinandan Saikia, who is an assistant professor and dean of the Social Sciences of School of Social Sciences and Humanities at this Guwahati campus. An explorer bridging natural and social sciences, his thematic interest includes agroforestry, biodiversity, innovation studies, theories of institutional change, and traditional knowledge. He brings a unique interdisciplinary perspective to today's discussion. So with such an amazing panel, we are sure this session will give us a valuable idea and inspire great dialogues. Thank you for being here. And now let's dive into this exciting journey together. Over to you, Dr. Abhinandan.
First of all, a very good, happy New Year to all of you. And since this is the third Winter Bird Festival, we are this time happening for the third time, and it's going very nicely for last 2 years. And hope so this time also we get the same flavor at more amount of insights. We have today two eminent personalities to discuss on the theme of indigenous culture and conservation. So, and as we are also running short of time because we have wasted, so I'm coming directly to the initiation of the session. First of all, let me tell you that this session will be for around around 50 to 1 hour, where each speaker will be getting around 20 to 25 minutes for their discussion, say sharing their insights. And followed by that, there will be a round of questions from the participants. So please feel free to put your questions, and you can either, it can be an audible question, or it can be a texted question, but the question will be happening at the end of the session. So with that, first of all, welcome again to the show. And I will now request Professor Purabi to tell us about her journey as a researcher and how she has come to this podium till now and her experience with this indigenous culture and conservation.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. Thank you to Seven Waves and organizing for such a wonderful event and inviting me as one of the speakers. I apologize that last year when I was invited, I couldn't accept this to be here, but I'm glad that you kept persistent and invited me again. And this time, irrespective of my travel and everything, I decided to join in. So please apologize for not having the typical presentation of using PowerPoint and other formats. I'll use my best with my voice and with my story to keep you engaged and not to make you sleep. And if you do, it's it's my fault. So I'm Purabi Bose, and I briefly would like to start with the topic of indigenous culture and conservation, giving an overview, and then talk about the traditional conservation practices, then move on to the third part as land rights and the challenges and the opportunities. that it provides, and then move to the last element of mainstream conservation integration. So these are the four basically aspects that I'll cover in the next 15-20 minutes. To begin with overview, I think it's important to understand from where we all begin. And for me, the indigenous culture and the indigenous conservation and the indigenous people and communities was not something that's separate from my upbringing. So I come from a family where my maternal ancestry is indigenous. Yet the interesting element of here when we talk about mainstream, and that's how I also see my research and focus of my work, is that most of the people in 1940s and 50s didn't have the category of indigenous people as a category that that was protected and that was recognized. And recognition plays an important role in the last decade, I think, when the indigenous people have been receiving more international recognition, that many people feel proud and feel connected to associate themselves as indigenous people. And I think this is where what comes from my background, as in where my maternal side, they didn't want to associate themselves with the indigenous communities, and they left their forestry lifestyle, and then they moved to urban areas. And when you move to urban areas, as many indigenous people does in many parts of the world, their identity becomes very challenging, or it's in a dilemma, because the whole aspect of what is indigenous knowledge or what is indigenous people's way of life is associated with the way of living, where they are, where they have been born, and where they have been connected to. And I think this is where much of my work has been on looking at indigenous identity and what do we mean. In India, as we all know, many of you would know that we don't recognize indigenous as a concept, indigenous people. So it's more, we use the term Adivasis or the tribal scheduled tribes. And that's another element of how legal aspect is often contradicts with the indigenous way of living, and very little emphasis is on indigenous knowledge as such of what it means and how they think about. So that's a briefly in terms of the overview. I would say that it's their the connection with the environment is associated with their identity and where they are living and how they associate themselves. Uh, there is a book that I just published recently. It's called Acknowledging Indigenous Knowledge. And this is a kind of book that it's based on my work of the last 20 years I have been doing in different parts of the world, mainly in Latin America and in Southeast and South Asia, and in partly in East Africa, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. So this book, Acknowledging Indigenous Knowledge, is basically covering the topic of various elements, and that includes what do we mean by indigenous knowledge? How do we acknowledge it? And the important part is whether we are ready to acknowledge, and that's the challenge that we have seen across India as well. Uh, one of the element of one of the lessons that I have learned from this particular while documenting this study as a book is that I cover different case studies from different countries, and I can clearly say three things. First, that across all the countries, across the geographical boundaries, indigenous people have a unique way of living that is interconnected in a way that they are all similar. They all believe that the value of environment, value of nature is something that is closely associated to their identity, that is closely associated to their well-being. And the well-being part is very less studied because it's often talked about from economic dimension and from nature conservation. But when you talk about the well-being, I think that's one element. And the second element is about the value that one associates with the way the conservation we understand from the Western knowledge and from the mainstream knowledge, or whatever or the scientific element, and that is quite contradictory to how the indigenous way of conservation is being valued. And this again cuts across all the geographical boundaries, wherein they all see conservation as more holistic rather than limited to one particular site or limited to one particular wildlife or one particular species, trees or ecosystems. So it's more about a way of conservation which is more in a more holistic way. And the third element, or the third lesson that I personally found very intriguing is that is that almost all the government, almost all the laws, almost all the policies are created to hinder or to provide hurdles to this indigenous way of conservation. And it is quite strategic to understand that irrespective of the vast knowledge, irrespective of the vast experiences of local way, of community way of conservation, we have seen across all the countries in that the policies are often created in a way that kind of contradicts the indigenous communities' way of lifestyle. Now, coming to the second aspect of the presentation, that is on the traditional conservation practices, it's again something that I would like to highlight here is that a lot of damage has been done in the way narratives have been created based on the scientific studies. And one of those that you see is the practices that has been traditionally done for centuries has been questioned somewhere in 1950s, 1960s by a way of by way of seeing it as a threat. And one example that I can provide immediately is my study that I did in Mizoram on oil palm plantation and looking at it from the jhum cultivation. So in early 1950s, we have seen these narratives of jhum is bad, and it has gone into jhum or Sweden, it's shifting cultivation. It is gone into the mainstream media. It's gone into the mainstream population as a form saying that by burning, they are burning the land and they are destroying the forest, and they don't have knowledge, and they are and the idea of jhum is absolutely bad for conservation. It's the kind of a narrative, this negative narrative that has built on from there, though the scientific world has now taken a U-turn and is kind of has been redeveloping their narratives, but the damage has been done, and that is what is the challenge, because now you have to again unlearn and relearn the fact that these are actually what we have made mistakes in our understanding of conservations, and it has been good, and there has been other elements that has come into focus that are creating challenges to this jhum cultivation, not necessarily the entire element of jhum, the traditional way of doing jhum. I will come back to you for 1 minute. Coming to this land rights as a third element of my presentation, I think one of the main argument that I always pose here is that globally and in India, the focus has been on individual rights rather than on collective rights, and this is something that this is something that has affected the social well-being of the communities, as well as aiding in creation the fragmentation. And somewhere when you talk about how nature conservation and this land rights are contradictory, it's often the fortress conservation that we talk about that has created a lot of problems in the local community. I would say that has been excluded from being part of the conservation process rather than involving them. They have been kept as someone who are not knowledgeable. And I think this identity of stakeholder as a key stakeholder has not been taken seriously in many policies when we talk about conservation in India, but also in many places. And collective rights also means that it is not again limited to certain area, or especially you would see in many policies that suggest how much acre or how much hectares of land does your community being conserving. That's not how the conservation practices has been done in the past. Traditionally, it is the land that one can see that belongs to the community. So the idea or the concept of limiting the land in terms of number is not something that many indigenous communities are familiar with. It's a very new ideology of that what we as a scientist think that okay, we should divide and create this compartment. That's not how the land rights I don't perceive in that sense. Yet when we bring in the development, when we have to deal with the development elements such as plantations or mining, we tend to create this land compartment, and that is again in a long run could be a threat, because we are again limiting the indigenous communities who are never been limited to a particular land size now into a smaller zone. And this is very typical. Just to give you an example, from my recent stay in Sweden, we have indigenous communities there, indigenous people known as Sami. And one of the major aspect of conservation, impact of conservation, has also been the fact that the land that they have been managing for several decades is shrinking. And that's partly because of the green energy that the Scandinavian countries are promoting with the windmill and with clean energy, and this impacts the way the herding communities have been roaming around freely as a pasture in the pasture land, and that's again the reason why I'm highlighting that mapping or by limiting the land often is a kind of challenge that the indigenous communities are facing, and that we need to understand it in a better way and not just think of collective and individual rights. Lastly, the fourth point is mainstream conservation integration, and here I think I'd like to use the example of what is this conservation in the current scenario. So one of the I make films, or rather, I have made films on indigenous people. And one of the stories that I had collected, which I haven't yet made a film on, was in the South India, where there is a human. And again, the term that I'm going to use is not my favorite term: human wildlife conflict. I don't use the term conflict as such. I would rather use the term coexistence. And that's what I wrote a chapter in this book, where I'm talking about why the coexistence matters and not the conflict, because it's a way of it's a way of perception. It's the other perspective. But coming to it, there is this entire element of how communities have been managing the managing to conserve a land that has been protected for a long time together with the wildlife. But then now with the funding that comes in to protect the wildlife and then to create this an entire another zone for humans as something that seems to be very different. And that goes also with the tiger conservation in Chhattisgarh, and that also goes with snow leopard conservation in Ladakh. And I have seen across all these places, and I'm sure many of you would have the similar observations where it's seen that the people or the communities are something separate compared to the wildlife or compared to the landscape, and that tendency that we bring in is a very mainstream way of approaching the conservation practices. So the focus should be more on how the local communities have been living with this wildlife or with this ecosystems that has been maintained for such a long, and what were the factors that hindered such changes in the coming years that has led them to that has led to such kind of narratives such as conflicts due to very little is known about food conflict, where the kind of invasive species that we see in South India, especially lantana, where elephants are not able to find food, and then you come to Western India, where the migratory birds that come to Gujarat, and they are often finding challenge because of the fences that is created in those areas and the solar panels that has been put up. So one needs to look from this element of what do we mean by conservation from mainstream conservation, and how important is to reflect on the traditional conservation practices that can help to revive this uh, an entire aspect of managing the resources. And my last point here, so before I conclude, um, I would be very interested to see this partnership of different private and public partnerships, but not in a traditional way, but to kind of do it out of the box, wherein one is thinking more in terms of I would say funding is not always the challenge. It's what is most important is the element of um, how much do we want to really work with the community. And I suppose there is this entire gap of elite, knowledgeable intellectual, and those who are indigenous knowledge. And I think that needs to be stopped. One needs to stop thinking from that element and say that there is nothing like elite intellectual and those indigenous knowledge that we should try to integrate. As long as we continue to focus on that kind of narrative that we should uh, try to understand or try to integrate the indigenous knowledge, this gap of cultural indigenous culture and the conservation would exist. So on an optimistic note, I think an event like this and the work of the Seven Waves would definitely be one of the steps forward to kind of undo the changes that we have seen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Purabi. Uh, it was like as if you have widened the canvas for this, matlab, going for having a lot of questions, because what I can understand from your session is that the way that you have brought it up, like for example, the way how you have explained culture and the way how we have tried to integrate the element of culture in conservation, it was very clear from your experience that different layers are coming up. Like it's not something a very linear way of looking the concept of culture itself. Maybe it is more of a multilinear concept, which is exactly at some point being getting contested by different political ecology, different social science attributes, and how over the time it has become more complicated. And besides, there is also something called theory of change, because communities are also changing. That's what I could understand from your understanding. And at the same time, I think when you talked about Northeast, especially because right now we have been doing this session from Guwahati, because which is a hotspot of biodiversity. And interestingly, if you look into the concept of hotspot, we have this endemic plants, and we have also issues of endangered species that are both are linked, interlinked. But at the same time, when it comes to different land use like Jhum cultivation and also issues of commons. Today, we in Northeast, of course, on the papers, we are getting the idea that the life on land has improved. But there is a question on a very important idea of biodiversity, because it is not only the plants, but the plantation, which is making a different point. It's not about regarding the variety that we are exactly going to see in future. That's remain a big question. But I think discussion will be carried on. And once and again, I think we'll be coming up with some more questions once we get some other view from Professor Yves. And now I would like to request my friend Professor Yves. I think we have met him before in Guwahati, and it was a nice interaction with Yves when I met him for the first time, as a human being, as a researcher, and also as a good friend who have traveled a lot throughout the world, mostly had a good experience in Africa, the mother country from whole the Homo sapiens have come up, and of course also giving his experiences, and also sharing his experiences from the point of Europe and from the also point of South Asia. So I now would like to hear from him his journey as a researcher, as an explorer, and how, and at what point he has learned about the contact between culture and conservation. Over to Professor Yves.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for Purabi presentation. In fact, I think Purabi did something very right, do not prepare a presentation, because in fact the subject is such complex and is going in so many different directions that trying to have a coherent entry door just put me in a trap, in a sense. So I will first ask you to apologize if I don't follow very strictly my presentation. In fact, the support is there. It will give you some insights regarding some of the groups I was lucky to interact with. But yeah, I felt it as a trap somehow. We will maybe come back to that in the end. This is a very complicated topic. So I decided to present you the case of two indigenous people groups that I was lucky to interact with. Both of them are pygmy groups. So the first one is the Batwa. The Batwa is the most eastern subgroups of pygmy population. It is scattered in the mountains of Congo, Burundi, and Rwanda. In Burundi, this is a bit a particular case. There are semi-nomadic to sedentary, because there have been a lot of degradation happening already. It is estimated that there are about 1% of the population, and of course they have been impacted strongly by deforestation and conservation. As in most of the countries where these groups are, they are socially marginalized and economically impoverished, and modernity has only worsened the situation for them. They are living on the edge, both physically, because there are only very few remaining natural habitat outside of parks and reserves, where they have been expelled. So they are not supposed to be in the parks and reserve, but there is no more forest outside. And except this, they have as well this kind of second-class citizenship, meaning that it's very difficult for them to access identity cards, to manage to get a passport, to manage to travel abroad, to manage to access education. I mean, there is really a kind of barrier, very strong barrier for these people. So just maybe to explain a bit where it comes from and why I'm starting with them. First of all, it comes from a life experience thing and not from a work or study thing. I was a child. I was lucky enough to be born and to grow up in Africa, in rural Africa. When I was around 10 years old, I became very interested in snakes. I was living in Burundi at the time. The Batwa were reputed to be the best snake handlers, and that's how I came to interact with them and to enter into contact with them, because I was much interested in knowing more about the snakes. Because of the particular situation in Burundi, as I said, a lot of them have been already sedentarized, and some of them have been turning to agriculture, but they still maintain strong ties with the forest and the biodiversity, and they still practice what became today illegal harvest of wild resources, both animal and vegetal. The snakes and their pathology has been a very good and a very interesting entry door. I label it anthropologic entry door. Once you start to manipulate snakes, at least in Africa, that's probably the best way for people to forget that you are a white people. Because they are fascinated somehow. They are more interested in the snakes than in yourself. And quite quickly, they forget a bit that you are a white people, which is good. In fact, it's very important that they do forget. So what I came to realize after several months and years of interaction, I've been visiting them from the age of 10 to the age of 17 very regularly. I've been hunting with them in the forest. I've been spending sometimes weekends, sometimes weeks in the forest with them. And I came to realize that they were really a very specialized group, particularly regarding snakes. In most of Africa, there is a vernacular names for common snakes or for dangerous snakes, but never for the whole species. Impressive enough, the Batwa are having 72 species of names in their language to label every species, including the most naturally rare one, including the very cryptic and elusive ones. So it shows how much their knowledge is extended about these groups. They're having very good knowledge in terms of understanding the ecology, the habitat use, the behavior of these species. They know exactly where and when to find them at which time of the year. And they are very, very good in terms of snake handling techniques. They have developed their own tools and they really became very, very good at this. This knowledge that I discovered that was applying to the snakes, in fact, applies to most of the natural components they are depending on. So you can apply it to honey gathering, you can apply it to traditional hunting of small mammals. I mean, the same level of knowledge is there as well. One of the big challenges that these people are facing today is that most of the area that still have wild resources are parks and reserves. They were displaced to create the wilderness to protect gorillas and chimps, particularly in Rwanda, Congo, and Burundi. And in fact, their hunting practice became de facto illegal because there is no legal hunting grounds that is accessible, and there is no process that is organized so that they can harvest. So in a sense, the criminalization of the traditional hunting methods that started during colonial times continue after the end of the colonial time, and have been pushing this population really in a corner. Today, the situation is really a bit bleak if we look particularly at what is happening in Burundi and Rwanda, because most of the natural habitat is gone. Social marginalization is multifaceted, and I mentioned it, and Daniel of ID, spatial segregation, limited access to education, social dependency to neighboring Bantu groups. I mean, they are really in a very, very difficult situation. There is absolutely no recognition of any land right or customary right of occupancy. They have been writing both in Burundi and Rwanda to the presidents to request that there is some recognition of the rights. For the moment, it didn't come up. But one of the good side effects is that they started to organize themselves to lobby and to defend their interests and rights. There are several groups that appears, and they are making quite a good job. There have been a recent change in Congo DRC regarding the legislation, which is much more pro indigenous people compared to before. Now we have to wait to see if it's going to be implemented or not. So this was something from my very young years. I didn't do that as a researcher. I didn't do that as a practitioner. That was really a life experience. The second group I'm discussing is the Baaka. So the Baaka is another pygmy groups that live On the other side of the Congo Basin, on the western side, in Central African Republic, Congo and Cameroon, they are still living in a very large forest area. They still practice for most of them a mobile way of life. They still largely are practicing hunter-gatherer way of life. And even if there is some sedentarization of groups, which has had negative impact in terms of health, most of them are still, I can say, free somehow. And they have very extended traditional ecological knowledge applied to a very diverse set of resources and natural living conditions that they are using. If we just look a bit at the core regarding particularly the hunter-gatherer, then there is a lot of traditional hunting practices that is requesting extended traditional ecological knowledge, particularly the collective seasonal hunting with nets. So they are producing these nets collectively with natural fibers. They are using them in the field, and they are bringing back the animals. So this is all participating to the social reproduction of the groups, this collective hunting. It's quite efficient, and they have as well another type of hunting which is called the call. The call is just that they imitate with their mouth the noise of a baby antelope, and frequently the antelope just run in your knees because it's working. So all these elements just to show you how much they still have this traditional knowledge, and how much they are still live knowledge because they are using it on a daily basis. The diet of these people is mostly relying on collection of seasonally available fruits, seeds, nuts, roots, leaves, mushrooms, honey, harvesting of insects, caterpillars, small-sized mammals. One very interesting thing is that there have been a heavy body of research, because initially they were accused of targeting elephants, gorillas, and so on. But most of the research showed that these people are focusing mostly on the most common and the most fast breeding species, like the blue duiker and some small monkeys. And there is in fact strong taboo, so social norms that prohibit the collection of naturally rare species such as the bongo, which is the forest antelope. So all in all, it shows that as long as they don't sell to external markets, they are definitely sustainable in terms of the way they are living, regarding the impact on both the habitat and the wildlife. In terms of housing, that picture is finally not very illustrative because we are in a transition. Most of the mobile ones are using only natural materials sourced from the forest. And after 3 or 4 weeks after they are gone from their camp settlements, you cannot even see that they were there. Now they are turning to hybrid systems where they start to use mud house, thatch house like the Bantu, but they still keep on using natural materials. For the Baraka, the challenge are quite the same. We have, and this is a very recurring problem for pygmies. There is no recognition of any kind of land rights. There is, but this is probably linked with the project, a limited recognition of user rights in the Dzanga-Sanga Special Reserve. They have the same problem as in Burundi to access identity cards or passport or so on. They have the same restriction of access to social services. There is a story of very big conflict with conservation, and there have been these BuzzFeed issues that I think you have been hearing about, with accusation of human rights violations that were allegedly done by conservation organizations. So now, if I try to summarize a bit, lesson learned from all the things I've been doing with communities, I mean, indigenous people would take ages to summarize. But I think one of the most important one, and it is not only from the pygmy group, but as well from the other groups I've lived with. And I think this is a key issue, because if you look at Western societies, and I would say as well the part of the global South that has turned urbanized and modernized and so on, we have a conception that nature is separated from ourselves. I think Purabi mentioned that earlier. And I think this is the modernity view of nature. Human beings are at the top, and we are controlling everything, and everything is there to serve us. In fact, of course, the indigenous people don't see themselves the same way. They see themselves as part of nature. And there is something very interesting regarding the interspecific barrier that they don't see as permeable in neither direction, bringing non-human life forms closer to us. If, of course, if the animal we meet is possibly a transformed human beings or the spirit or reincarnation of an ancestor, it's clear that it's not so different from us. And I think this is very important to understand why these people are not slaughtering wildlife, why they are not, just killing what is there, because in a sense, it's not compatible with the excessive exploitation of resources, which implies a kind of dehumanization of the species that are targeted. So that's one important point. In fact, these are as well the only population who manage to make a living in a sustainable way with nature without endangering the resources that underpin their development. Of course, today there is no more ideal situation where they are alone in their habitat. Of course, there is a lot of disturbances. There is a lot of external stakeholders that come in this area, and this is one of the big challenges we are facing. Most of the traditional management practice were either enhancing or maintaining species and ecological processes. But in the end, we have been dismantling so much of these that it's very difficult today to come back and to try to reconstruct and redefine what were the traditional way of doing things. And I think it's very important at that level that conservation must not only continue to examine its colonial origins, but also question the persistence of neocolonial system well beyond independence. I don't know how much this is still the case in India, but definitely in Africa, and at least in part of Latin America and some other Asiatic countries, it applies. And then there is a very, very important issue that is linked with the access to financial resources. I will come back to that question on the next slide as well. These people need to access financial resources directly, not through NGOs, external NGOs, or so on. That's really a key issue. They need to be associated to decision making, and we need to be explicit about the fact that there is a lot of power struggles in these conservation issues, and we have to deal with it in an explicit way. And if I look for the African case for the indigenous people, the most important issue remains the legal recognition of their indigenous status. Most of the countries don't recognize; they pretend that they are all indigenous. The issue of the recognition of the property rights of a land and management and user rights as well is really something that should be pushed. The challenge of maintaining mobility in an area of modern states don't like mobility. They try to block it. They want to be able to tax people. They want to be able to control people. And as pastoralists have realized as well, modern states don't like mobility. And then we have as well to recognize their ability to manage and use resources in a sustainable way, because there is a very long narrative in conservation where we were accusing, in fact, these people of being responsible of the degradation. So that's something that must change as well on the conservation side. And in the end, if we do that properly, then we will recognize that they are playing a very important role in conservation, but we can expect that both conservation organizations and governments might resist. And I will briefly come to why and what. I used to say that the relationship between conservation and indigenous people is the one that started with an original sin. The original sin is what I qualify the fact that we have been establishing from the scratch all these newly established protected area on land that was belonging to these indigenous people, and they were forcefully displaced for that. This started in Yellowstone National Park at the end of the 19th century, but it's still continuing today. So that's a big issue, because maybe some people think it's over, but it's still happening in several places. The second failure after this original sin that was not really acknowledged is what I call the failed alliance. In the early 2000s, there was a very, very important paper authored by a guy called Mac Chapin from World Watch that really created a nightmare for the big NGOs in conservation, because it outlined how much they were not respecting the indigenous people and local communities. And it has been really a shock in the field, and a lot of donors started to pressurize conservation organizations so that they better consider local and indigenous people. Now, if you look at the evidence as well, we have now a large bunch of data that shows that confronted with the same destructive pressures, indigenous territories fare better, resist better to these pressures compared to a protected area, particularly government protected area. In fact, in summary, IP people achieve better results, but with less conflicts and a minimum cost, and that's another issue. as conservation became a very big business, as I said, we can expect resistance to see the financial resource and power flow in the hands of IPs. The model that the modern conservation developed, the model with the high tech, with the militarization of conservation, with drones, with cameras, with all these very costly monitoring systems, is just what makes conservation to be so expensive. If we give these territories to indigenous people, they will probably get better results, but with $1 million less cost. But that's part of the problem, because of course these organizations want to maintain their situation, and they see as a threat the fact that IP might be, how can I say, reinvited to the table and given back a role that should not have been stripped from them. So now we are at a momentum, because a lot, you have certainly heard that a lot of promises have been made that finance will flow to indigenous people directly. There have been a lot of commitments. We have seen several important formal recognition of IP rights, particularly at the UN level. So in a sense, it's like we have all the things we need. We get the data that show that they are the best. We have all the information about the fact that we have been doing wrongly for more than 150 years at a minimum. And we probably know where to go if we need to change the things. And that should be the pathway. But as I said, I doubt that this will come from the established conservation stakeholders. I think that this will come from newly created alliances. And I think that what Seven Weaves is trying to do, it looks quite similar to such an alliances of good-willing people from different backgrounds, but that will definitely give respectful places and consideration to indigenous people in the system, and if possible, that will let them lead these things. I remember a very interesting discussion I had with Marshall Murphy, that was the father of the community-based approaches in Africa, that was telling me that a lot of these people from the conservation organization were afraid of indigenous people and local communities, because they were afraid to get jobless at the end. And he was telling them, you should not be afraid. These guys, they will need you, but you will have to accept that you will not control anymore the wallet, and you will not control anymore the key of the car as well. You have to accept to share the power regarding these processes, and you have to accept to be one among others and not to be the leader. And I think that's a very big challenge for Western conservation organizations. With this, I close for now, and I'm very open to any discussion.
Thank you, Professor Yves. Lovely the way you have placed it. Like, I think it was an eye-opener to know more about Africa, and also the lessons that we have learned. Interestingly, the point that you raised, like, how at some point, I was just going through your slides, the way you told about the indigenous communities' way of looking into the market, because they are not very much a market-based economy group. They are mostly dependent on their subsistence economy. So even they do hunting, I think there is a way in which they maintain the population within the ecosystem. That's very interesting to see to it. And also at the same time, to look into the challenges like the new modern forces of globalization has brought into their courtyard, and how exactly in the coming years this is going to be another chapter, and how the narratives of this conservation and culture are going to be changed. Nicely brought up, nicely brought up. I think we have got few questions, but before that, I would like to extend one of my question to both of you. Like, we all know about the issue of this climate change, which is exactly now becoming a sort of a discussion in every table, whether it is in a dining room discussion, whether it is a meeting room discussions. Every time, if you look into it, it is a topic that is following you everywhere like a shadow. So in that scenario, like, if I have to ask you very quickly, like, uh, how do you think this climate change issue is going to change the deliverables, or maybe the way how the culture and conservation is going to be in future? Very quickly, to both of you.
I have one very simple example that shows that these things are really not simple, and that history is key. And I think that this is a field where history is very important. Look at how did we look at the management system of indigenous people when we arrived? When we arrived, we were shocked that there were places where there was still so much biodiversity and so much abundance of wildlife and so much. We were not able to identify that it was the practice of these people that were enabling this biodiversity to be there. And in fact, we started to accuse that their practice were threatening these animals. For instance, if you look at the fire management, in many places in North America, in Africa, in Australia, it has been used as a justification to say that we cannot accommodate indigenous people in national parks and reserve because these people are burning the bushes, and they are destroying the vegetation. This is bad. So, okay, we have done the same thing in North America, in Kenya, in Australia. We have removed these indigenous people from this area. And in fact, which is funny enough, is that we took about a century to realize that it was a mistake. And today we are trying to reverse back, because what we realize is that a properly managed burning system is very good for biodiversity and particularly to fix biodiversity. So funny enough, the fire has been used to justify the expulsion of all these people. And today, there are many places where we are starting to study the traditional mode of burning, because we think that we might learn from these. And why all these issues of burning are key is because burning is a key factor regarding both emissions and storage capacity of soils and vegetation layers. So I think that, to answer to your question, climate change might have, I would say, positive impact, if I can say, on the fact that we are looking back at some traditional practices by indigenous people, because they might be a solution for some of the specific problems that climate change is bringing to us. So on that side, I think it's not a bad one.
I think you've covered everything. The basic element of understanding what climate change is the fact that we are living a lifestyle that is heavily dependent on resources that are in indigenous areas. And as long as we continue to do that, the negative impact would be high, and the burden would be very high on the indigenous communities. And this means that even the brilliant ideas of going clean green with battery run car, which is also in my current state, Goa, where we are using a lot of battery cars or scooties. And this is to say that, oh, we are very clean and green. But no, most of this nickel that you need for battery for the green batteries are coming from indigenous territories, and they are destroying the forest, are destroying the water resources and the food and ecosystems and wildlife, everything. So I think we need to understand that running away from facing the problem is what we are doing right now, of finding solutions through clean energy and green energy, without looking at what the consequences are for people in Chile, or people in indigenous people in Chile and indigenous communities in Indonesia, where such resources are being extracted. So yeah, I think I'm not giving a very positive outlook towards the climate change, but basically the idea is that as long as we strive to have maximum way of lifestyle without going for minimum, we are not changing anything.
I have got, I think, a few questions in the chat box. And I think there are, of course, I can see two questions coming up beautifully. I think one of the questions is like what we are discussing just now. Like we understand that by 2030, I think there's a prediction that most of the world population will become urban. And in fact, the size of the urban population will be very much equivalent to a country like South Africa. So that is a prediction that is coming up in most of the discussion quarters. But there's a question on this line. It says that with the pressure of urbanization and modernization, could indigenous community themselves become a challenge to conservation and traditional practices they once protected? Which of course it's difficult to say at this point, but like these are the questions that has come up. And at the same time, there is also another question that talks about how, because as I follow Professor Yves' presentation, he did mention about the way of different practices in the name of natural resource management has been made by different communities in Africa. And also, Dr. Purabi talked about her experience in South Asia as well. It's about the role of non-materialistic culture in indigenous communities, how it exactly contributes to conservation and biodiversity. In fact, I would like to hear from both of you, because these are some of the questions which are coming up and hovering us our thoughts in everyday business. In fact, when you think about anything regarding indigenous wisdom and also at the same time addressing modernity, but then how we address, that's a question.
There are two questions, if I understand correctly. The first is, with the pressure of urbanization and modernization, could indigenous communities themselves become a challenge to conservation? I think it's not about future. It's already happened, and it's not going to get better. One example would be my working with the pastoralist communities, and what is immediate observation is that the youth, the younger generation, they are leaving the traditional way of pastoral lifestyle, which is semi-nomadic and very hard sometimes, also because of various factors, as I had mentioned in my presentation, such as limitation of land, roaming area, and other factors. But then, so what you see is once they move towards the urban areas, the entire generation of carrying out these practices is gone. You can bring them back again, but it will not be the same, because you cannot bring the knowledge back, because it will be a new knowledge that will be generated. So the reason why there is a lot of focus on why traditional ecological knowledge needs to be recognized and needs to be acknowledged now is because of this element that we are losing out the younger generations, and once they move to the urbanization, or the urbanization moves to the rural and indigenous areas, then then there is nothing left. Mainstreaming is the most challenging aspect for these conservation practices. Regarding the second, what is the role of non-materialistic culture? I think plenty has been said about the non-materialistic culture is something that has kept the nature conservation for such a long time, and protection of biodiversity. But then, as I have mentioned, that as long as we continue to focus on the materialistic good and then say that, oh, we want a sustainable lifestyle, it's not going to happen. So there has to be a challenge within ourselves to change the system.
So I think Purabi answered very well to the question. No, I fully agree with what you said, that it's happening already, and it's not going to be better. And I think that Seema could have presented a work about Deepor Beel and the fishermen in Deepor Beel, because it's just illustrating exactly what we are discussing. Huh? And in fact, one thing that I find important to remind is that these people don't have alternatives, don't have choices. It's not that they prefer to do this or this. It's just that they try to survive. And I think we should be a bit careful by not putting judgments on what they are doing, because if we were in the same situation, probably we would not act better. And I think that's an important point that I would like to make for the first one. For the second, the issue of this non-materialistic thing, I think the best way to summarize it is a discussion I was lucky to witness between Species Survival Commission experts and a representative of First Nations in Cambridge in 2009. There was a meeting that was, I think it was a good idea to bring together, species specialists and First Nations representative, and to discuss about knowledge about biodiversity. And in fact, it turns to be a very, very, very bitter argument, because in a sense, the conservationists we're saying that, okay, look, we are doing what we call peer reviews. You know, our knowledge is validated by our peers, and it means that the knowledge, once we publish the paper, we know that this knowledge is valid. I tell you, there was a Sami representative, the guy just gets out totally exploded. And the guy was telling him, okay, our peer review is how many hundred of people have been dying to know that this mushroom was edible, you know? And it was an example, but he was just saying, we cannot oppose these two ways of looking at knowledge, because in a sense, the source of this knowledge is not the same. And the source of the knowledge of indigenous people is rooted in their life experience, is rooted in their generations and generations of accumulated knowledge that was transmitted orally and so on. So from my opinion, and we are back to what I was saying regarding this very particular relationship they have with non-human species. Our worst problem of a Western way of Western mindset is the way we are looking at species. If we were able to reconnect with species in a way that we recognize that they are somehow similar to us, even if different, I think that's a key thing. And I think that's one of the most important message from these indigenous people, at least the one I was lucky to work with, is that in a sense, they are just another ourselves. And that's a heavy message, I think.
Often what we come across mostly in debates related to development and conservation, we have sometimes ready-made recipes like ecotourism. Okay. And it says that, okay, this is something of one proposal which can actually work wonders to create a win-win situation between the communities and also, with the factor of conservation. But again, the examples are very mixed. Like you don't get too many results in a way. So your experience in Africa and Purbi's experience in other parts of the world, like when it comes to Northeast, we are nowadays getting also list of villages which come up with saying that, okay, this is going to be the cleanest village. Okay, so at some point of time, people try to go there, and tourist flows become better. And in fact, it comes in a chart saying that, okay, in a place like which is a biodiversity sensitive area, now we have so many tourists. In fact, I think 2-3 days back, there was a news that now if you have to go in the world's most visited place in the name of tourism, one of the places Assam, which is in the number 4. I forgot the category in which it has come, but it is now in the news. But at the same time, equally from Assam, since we have been born and brought up here, we are equally worried because it's also a biodiversity sensitive region. So in that scenario, like, with your experience, how generally we balance it? Like, the idea of this ecotourism, and also at the same time, the footfalls, and at the same time, we have this biodiversity issues, because these are challenges coming up. Because I can see there's a question asking about, is there any success stories of good models of preservation of indigenous knowledge? So where exactly we start and where exactly we go?
So I don't know. Tourism, I think we are back to what Purabi was saying about the green energy and all these things. As long as we don't change the software, that is just looking at increasing the revenue, increasing the number of people, increasing the consumption. I mean, this is what brings us into nightmare. So, of course, if we continue to apply the same recipe to what we are living, it's going to be a nightmare. The problem is that a lot of decision makers only look at it through that lens, money, revenue, GDP, blah, blah, blah. So I think as long as we are in that line, it's going to be the same recipe will produce the same results, and the results are not going to be good. This being said, I think there are quite diverse examples of successful approaches. And they are not sector-based. They are more holistic. They are not focusing on one sector or on one specific added value chain or whatever. Maybe it can use one specific added value chain as a engine, I can say, but it's more holistic. And the most important thing from my experience is an issue of rights. The only place where I've seen this happening is places where property rights over land, property rights over wildlife resources, property right over forest have been given back to communities. And in this case, it's working very well. You have a very, very good example in Namibia with the conservancies, which is really, this is the only country in Africa where wildlife is expanding. Huh? You know, in all the other part of continent, wildlife is vanishing, but Namibia is expanding. And if you look at why, it's simple. It's because this wildlife is expanding on communal land. Why? Because communal land, wildlife and the land belong to them, and they do whatever they want with it. They can do tourism, they can do hunting, they can do meat production, they can do whatever they want. And then that's the way it works. So I think the solutions are not so complicated. Give rights back to these people as much as possible, accompany them, support them, leave your position of expert, and all of us are going to be very happy.
From my observations and work experiences in Latin America, ecotourism has, I think it's let me come back to the second question about the success model. I somehow feel very uncomfortable when there is this question of success model, because a success model is very very local, very specific to a particular area, and you cannot generalize this and replicate it. And this idea of replication has created a lot of challenges, because the idea is good. You can think of that as an idea to use it for managing, but it doesn't work because entire system changes. So I somehow feel very uncomfortable with the success story. Whereas with the ecotourism, the state that I am right now, Goa, is pushing for ecotourism. And the impact I can see is the forest area that has been cut right next door, and I'm very annoyed. So we are going to become, because this was a year where Goa's tourism went down, and there was a lot of questions because people are going to South Asia, Southeast Asia, because it's more cheaper to go to Southeast Asia than to come to Goa. As an ecotourism point of view, if you cut down all the trees and then you plant eucalyptus on the roadside, and to build this road and the highway, 6-lane highway, no tourism which is focusing on sustainable would be interested to come and visit, to see roads and malls. And so I suppose the ecotourism should also come with this idea of leaving the place the way it is, because that's where the beauty lies. If you keep cleaning the place and say, oh look, our villages are clean now, it looks like a European village, but that's not the context. The context is, if people want to see European, they would go to Europe. The reason why they want to come to Assam is to see the beauty of this, not this clean green trimmed trees. And that's where my argument is, that what do we mean by ecotourism? So we should always question, what do we mean by those terminologies when we use it?
I think now we are, I think, going by the time, and at some point of time, I think we will be coming to the end of the session. So I understand that when we talk about this whole issues, like, because I've been given the responsibility to be moderator, but sometimes, when you are a moderator, sometimes you also think about the time is also you have to maintain. So I am when you talk about the culture and conservation, two things I always have been looking into it, the two proverbs that we have learned in our school. One is that history repeats, and one is old is gold. Now, the thing is that I do not know whether old will be really gold, but there is a possibility that the dialogue has to start somewhere. There has to be somewhere down the line we have to come up to a midpoint. We think about something in the line of spirituality, something bringing in the role of ethics, where we can again think about a middle part, what Buddhism has prayed. Like, because we cannot deny development, we cannot also at the same time minus the importance of environmental importance. So, having said that, I was thinking about this event decade, 2021 to 30, which talk about ecological restoration. And as Purbi, you rightly pointed out, ecotourism in Goa, and at the same time, you can hear the sounds where the ECO becomes ECHO, it becomes echo. So that's something where the whole trick is, like, the dur se matlab, it looks like, from a distance, it looks like the same word echo, but when you go, it's become echo. So you have to be very like the narratives have been changing, and we really have to think in about that what exactly the future stores for us. I think with that, now before we wind up, I would just take one minute for both of you. Uh, the last punchline when you talk about culture and conservation, quickly, like from your both of you, like 1 minute of yours. What is the message that you want to leave it before you leave the session? The punchline from you, both of you.
Okay, so I think one punchline for me for this evening to end on this weekend would be to say that development and sustainability doesn't go hand in hand. If you want development, you have to sacrifice sustainability, and it's just running around bushes to say that we will work balance the sustainability. So development and sustainability are unsustainable or bad marriage, I would say.
So I agree, but one important thing to me, I think the problem is development. I think the problem is how we define it. It's not because it's a catchy word that everybody uses and so on, but what does it mean? If we speak about development in terms of quality of life, in terms of well-being, in terms of what the Latin Americans are calling the medio ambiente, I mean, if we discuss quality of life and not development, we don't discuss economic figures. We discuss satisfying of needs. And I think where we get lost on the way is that we have forgotten that economy is supposed to serve these, to respond to basic needs first, and not to create totally needful things. I mean, look at the system in which we are. The productivity is such that we are producing vast amounts of electronics, plastics, whatever, just as disposable things that are going to be thrown away. I think as long as we continue to think that development only equates with GDP, with growth, I think as long as we are going to get stuck in this, I think we will just fail. And I think it's not going to be something easy. It's going to be a collapse if we continue on that path. So I think it's a question. I used to tell to my students, the issue is not about nature. Nature is fine, and it will be fine. The issue is about the future of human societies. And I think this is why we should be responsible. It's just that we are destroying the conditions of our own existence. And we are making the only one that are living properly with nature, paying a high price for that. So I think that there is something wrong.
So now I thank you, both of you, for joining us for this session. And I think the participants might have got a lot of information that also about different insights about the way how we see the whole discourse of culture and conservation and what it exactly have in for future, keeping in mind that whether there will be some answers possible for sustainability when it comes to the issue related to development, conservation, and indigenous cultures. With that, I think we will now come to the end of the session. Now, I will thank you, Yves. Yeah, you have a question. Yeah, please, quickly.
No, I just wanted to clarify something. We discuss cultures and conservation, but we totally forget to say that what we call conservation is just a Western point of view about the relationship with nature. So by essence, even what we call conservation, which is in fact a globalized conservation, is just a very cultural way of looking at these things through a disciplinary lens and so on. Maybe we should ask indigenous people to define it, and they would make something clearer.
Definitely. I think perspectives matter, and that definitely is an important thing to define a society when it have different heterogeneous layers. With that, I think I will now request Seema to come help us in giving the vote of thanks from the 7 Waves Research Foundations. Over to Seema. Thank you, Yves. Thank you, Purabi.
So as we wrap today's webinar, 7 we'd like to extend our sincere gratitude to our esteemed speakers, Dr. Bose, Professor Yves, and Dr. Saikia for sharing their invaluable expertise, and to all of you for your active participation. We hope the discussion have sparked new perspectives on indigenous culture and have provided fresh ideas for conservation. Stay connected, and we look forward to welcome you in our future events. Thank you once again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.